Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sam Schwartz with the ABC Commissioning Group, and I'm here to welcome you to another ACG Essential Commissioning webinar series. This is our third year hosting a webinar every month from July through December, and we're excited to provide a fresh new lineup of topics related to the commissioning process. Special thanks to Blue Rhythm Commissioning Software for sponsoring this particular session. I'd like to go over a few housekeeping notes before we get started. Presenters will be holding questions until the end of the presentation, but we do encourage you to submit them at any time using the Q&A button. If you happen to be experiencing technical issues during the webinar, please use that chat function to inform the panelists, and we will assist you. This presentation is being recorded and will be available for viewing within 1 week. In terms of continuing education credit, everyone in attendance for the full webinar will receive a certificate of attendance sent to their email within 24 hours. And then finally, if you're a certified CXA or EMP, your CEUs for attending any webinar in the series will be automatically uploaded to your respective portals after the final webinar concludes in early December. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Jim Magee today, who's going to introduce our panel and get us started on today's topic. Jim?
Thank you, Sam. I'm sorry I probably switched over too soon. I appreciate the introductions. Welcome to the Essential Commissioning Webinar Series from AABC Commissioning Group. This is ACG Building Systems Commissioning Guideline Preview. I'm your moderator today. My name is Jim Magee. I'm with Facility Commissioning Group. We're in Lexington, Kentucky. On the panel today, we're honored to have Dan Bailey, our independent consultant, Christian Javorsky with Cadin Group LLC out of the Phoenix, Arizona, and Charles Jackson III with Sustainable Building Partners. He's from Fairfax, Virginia. You can see again the presentation, and this is a AIA continuing education credits are available. Course description, we're going to focus on the best practice narratives of our guideline and try to give you a detailed view of what the ACG Building Systems Guideline is about, how it differs, some insights into the strategies and topics that it discusses, and basically some of the detailed information on HVAC and HVAC controls, as well as lighting controls and daylighting controls. So when you're done today, you should understand ACG Building Systems Commissioning Guideline concept and how we use ASHRAE Standard 202 as the basic process. You'll understand that the CX acronym really stands for commissioning process in this system. You'll understand a bit of guideline content and some discernment on HVAC and lighting controls. This is where we'll go. We're going to talk to the panelists. We have some directed slides. We'll start with questions to Dan, our technical writer. Then we'll move to Christian, who was one of the principal writers or the principal writer of the HVAC sections of the guideline. Then we'll move to Charles, who was the principal author of the lighting controls and daylighting control sections of the guideline. And then we'll have some conclusions and open it up to questions. I want to also acknowledge the many members of the ACG Building Systems Commissioning Guideline Committee. I won't go through all the names, but they can be found in the guideline cover as well. Also, the excellent staff we have at ACG, Anna Ray Duffy, and of course, our technical writer, Dan. Motivations for the new guideline was to visualize the mission and core values of ACG, which are training and education, to support the ASHRAE Standard 202 and get down to business of basically helping the industry to grow by utilizing standardized terminology and a consistent process across the wide range of industry. We want to also increase the variety of building systems to be commissioned, because all building systems require commissioning in one form. You can commission it now, or you can commission it later. There are new sustainability and resiliency trends in the industry, and there's a lot of advantages that we capture by using a digital publication platform, not the least of which is our ability to update frequently. And we have our first update coming for the guideline on the JUMAG digital publishing platform at the end of July. ASHRAE Standard 202, I just want to make sure that folks are familiar. It's definitely any commission professional should be familiar with. the industry standard. There are also a lot of related documents that ASHRAE provides. The commissioning stakeholders document was contributed to by ACG, as was the strategic guide to commissioning. And you can also find a terminology. So in this commissioning definitions and terminology, these are definitions that we do not repeat in the ACG building systems guideline. There's also a new set of an entire library of documents that relate to Standard 202 that we also reference, for our building systems commissioning guideline. And you can see those here: commissioning process for existing buildings, HVAC, building maintenance, systems manuals, so forth. These are all very good references, and they apply directly to how we look at delivering commissioning services through the ACG. These are resources for producing commissioning deliverables, places to go. The whole building design guideline content was recently rewritten with a large contribution from Jerry Kettler, who was an ACG member. With that said, I will introduce Dan Bailey. He is our technical writer, and he joined our guideline committee in November of last year. And Dan is experienced. He's a experienced technical writer. He has a significant amount of background in sciences, and basically he supported the guideline committee with project management, technical writing, and extensive editing. One of the great things about Dan is he's not just a talented writer, but he also has a great acumen. And I think a lot of that comes from his education in natural science. He has a energy background and sustainability consulting background, where he worked for a consulting firm in Chicago before he moved to a Fortune 500 company for several years. And Dan's currently working as an independent consultant, and we have him very well engaged in supporting us with the Hvac platform and maintaining and continuing to write building systems commissioning guideline material. So Dan, with that said, I guess we can get into maybe some questions, and I guess to begin with, maybe discussing what it is that ACG attempts to convey in the building systems commissioning guideline.
Yes, thank you, Jim, and good afternoon, everybody. So what is ACG attempting to convey in the guideline? Best practices, guidance, strategies for implementing a comprehensive building systems commissioning process. And I should also say what we're not attempting to convey, and ACG is not attempting to rehash or rephrase or rewrite guidelines and standards that already exist in the industry and are very helpful. There is close alignment, as Jim said, between Standard 202 and this guideline, and Standard 202 was part of the impetus for producing this guideline. But we are attempting to do something new, something novel that can really benefit the industry. And as a quick example, Standard 202 mentions the importance of commissioning providers scheduling and convening meetings, but they don't provide a lot of detail. And so the guideline goes into detail about what kinds of meetings should be scheduled. What should those agendas be? What should their frequency be? How should minutes be recorded? How are these meetings conducted? And so what I like to say is that you can get a lot of the what from other standards and guidelines that are out there. But what ACG is attempting to do here is to answer the how and the why, to provide insights and strategies and the guidance to help understand and apply some of those other resources. Next slide. So let's look at some of the best practices quickly that the guideline is intended to cover. As I said, comprehensive commissioning process, and that means from project initiation through occupancy and operations. And it's intended to reflect ACG's preferred model for commissioning, independent third-party director-owner. Terminology is consistent with industry conventions, so we're attempting to use the Standard 202 terminology as much as possible. And in that sense, the guideline is being updated from the ACG commissioning guideline of 2005, which used different terminology. Advocacy for building owners and end users has always been important to ACG, and that's reflected in the guideline strategies that are presented. As I said, alignment with 202 and collaboration with other members of the project team. So standard 202 does go into and mention some of these other roles that are important in commissioning projects, but ACG seeks to expand on that in the guideline, discussing how the CXP should collaborate, work with, interact with, communicate with the owner, design team, construction team, et cetera. Certainly, there's an emphasis on energy sustainability and resiliency, more so now than ever. And that was touched upon in the 2005 guideline and will be expanded upon in this guideline. Advanced technologies, we all know technology is evolving rapidly. So how can technologies be applied to the commissioning process, both for project delivery and project management? And then the value of RFQ, RFP procurement. So in an industry that is facing sometimes increasing commoditization and a move towards selecting the low-cost bidder, how can CXPs stand apart and reinforce the value to owners and managers of the RFQ, RFP process? Next slide.
So what did you focus on when you were editing the content, Dan?
By and large, I focused on making the guideline consistent and readable. It's written by committee, and although I didn't attempt to go through and provide a single unified voice as if it was all written by one author, as you can imagine, for something written by committee, there are a lot of variations in style, in substance, and so I went in and tried to unify everything. Also, looking at the gaps, identifying the gaps, and helping to fill those in. Sometimes that would involve myself writing some transitions, some introductions, doing a little bit of research. Sometimes that would involve going back to the committee members and asking them to say, hey, can you add another paragraph here? I think if you add a paragraph here, that would really help convey your point more competently. So those kinds of things. Next slide. And here are just an example of the priorities. Certainly the uniform language, a consistent third person point of view. So if I take you back to high school English, that means a sentence such as commissioning providers should ... The commissioning provider needs to ... instead of saying I or we or you, but using that third person. Adopting similar structure, certainly, filling in the gaps, requesting clarification from committee members, like I said, adding transitions, splitting sentences, fact checking, grammar, spelling, etc. Basically improving overall clarity and readability. Next.
So what are the advantages of digital publishing? What are the key features of ACG's selected platform, JUMAG?
I think this was the key decision that ACG made with this guideline, was deciding not to do a print version, but to make a digital version. And there are a wide variety of advantages. Next. So obviously, continuous expansion beyond print limitations. We can do a guideline digitally that is 1,000 pages that would be frankly cumbersome to do in print, and rapid corrections and revisions. If we find an error or we need to expand on something, we can do that with the touch of a button. We don't have to wait 3, 4, 5 years for another print edition to come out. Those can be made nearly instantaneously if necessary. Facilitates access from anywhere. So if you have a mobile device connected to the internet, you can access the guideline. And you can also download a PDF if you wish for offline viewing. Maintaining relevancy and response to changes. So let's say there's an emerging trend in the industry that ACG wishes to respond to. They can write an article about that and have that published in the guideline within a couple of months. That's just not possible in print. A variety of customizable page enhancements come with digital publishing. So hyperlinks, pop-up windows, subscription access. We've talked about potentially videos in the future being added. A lot more options with the technology. Next. Jumag is the digital platform that ACG decided to use to host the guideline. It's an all-in-one digital publishing platform. And it as I said, provides access through a variety of apps, social media, browsers. In this case, users can download the guideline as a PDF for offline viewing. And ACG will be able to use Jumag to manage subscriptions and provide access to the guideline in a variety of ways. Next.
So what guideline sections have been published to date, Dan, and what's planned for our next update and when?
So the ACG Guideline Committee specifically has decided to adopt a roughly quarterly update. And so that means each quarter, starting with an update planned for the end of this month, July, which will be the first update, we'll be adding sections to the guideline. We'll be potentially revisiting and updating some existing sections. And so let's see what's been published to date and what's planned next. Next slide. This is the working version of the table of contents from the preface through the appendices. And most of this was published in April. Some of the sections in section 5, which is colored in blue there, were published in April. The balance is expected to come at the end of July. And then section 7 as well is expected to be published by the end of July. And many of sections within in the black text were published in April. Next. And in terms of what's planned for the next update, like I said, the balance of section 5, section 7, and then possibly some additional individual articles that have been written and are being reviewed to be published in additional sections. And that pie chart at right shows that as of now, the ACG Guideline Committee has envisioned 155 distinct guideline articles. And about 2/3 of those have been published, and another 1/3 of those are in various stages of completion. Next.
So what are the main similarities and difference between ACG language, from the 2005 guideline, and ASHRAE Standard terminology that we now use in the Building Systems Commissioning Guideline?
Great. There are a number. First of all, I will say that in most cases, there are similarities between what ACG has adopted as language and what Standard 202 adopts. There are some instances where ACG has had to update its language from 2005 to align with Standard 202. And there are some instances in which we in the guideline are using different terms from what Standard 202 uses simply for clarity. And I'll go over some of those. Next. Commissioning process, and I won't read it, but you can see the ASHRAE Standard 202 definition here, is defined by Standard 202, and ACG adopts this definition. I do want to distinguish, as Jim alluded to earlier, that CX in Standard 202 stands officially for commissioning process. I know historically many in the industry have used CX as an abbreviation simply for commissioning, but 202 specifically and intentionally adds that word process to the abbreviation. So if you're reading Standard 202 or the guideline and you see CX, think commissioning process, not just commissioning. Next. This chart here shows the difference in phases from 2005 to 2022 in terms of the ACG guidelines. In 2005, ACG used the 5-phase structure at the left. We are using the 4-phase structure at the right, which is not strictly defined in Standard 202. And that's because the consensus mandatory portion of 202 does not label phases. Obviously, the language in 202 does reflect a process, but because they have to have consensus, in order to publish it in the mandatory portion, I think there was some disagreements, some differences of opinion about what the different phases should be named and how they should be structured. So the committee decided, well, let's just not name the phases. Now, the phases are described in the appendices in Standard 202 so that they align with various ASHRAE guidelines. And ACG decided to adopt that 4-phase structure that you see there on the right. Next. Commissioning provider is defined by Standard 202, as you can see there. And in 2005, ACG used the term commissioning authority. We are using commissioning provider, or CXP for short, throughout the guideline to be consistent with 202. Next. And in terms of commissioning team and project team, I think this is one of the major differences that ACG decided on. ASHRAE uses project team to define all staff who are involved in the project and CX activities. And that can be kind of confusing. ACG prefers to use the word commissioning team, which has historically been used to define the team that's led by the CXP. Thanks. And in terms of commissioning provider group, we also draw this distinction. ACG uses commissioning provider group, and ASHRAE uses commissioning provider team. But again, we're using group in the guideline to distinguish it from the commissioning team to help avoid some confusion.
So what does the future hold for the ACG building systems commissioning guideline?
So there's a lot of opportunity to expand and improve the guideline over time. We were just really getting started in April, and I know the ACG board and the ACG guideline committee have a lot of vision for how this guideline can grow and evolve over time. And I do want to give quickly a shout out to those in attendance that the ACG guideline committee is continually looking for volunteers who are willing to step up and potentially write some articles for inclusion in the guideline. And so the committee is always looking for people to help out with this process. It's truly a collaborative process. And it's going to end up being what the committee and other members of ACG make it out to be. Well, let's look at some of those. Next. So as I said earlier, the committee plans to update roughly quarterly. The next one's planned for late July. So enhancements will include new articles that have been conceived but not yet written, other ideas to be covered. A big change will be the division and expansion of Section 8, which currently covers a variety of specific building systems, including HVAC and lighting controls, which Christian and Charles will be covering next. But we'll be splitting that up and expanding it to cover other topics, including topics that you don't necessarily see covered in other existing commissioning guidelines. For example, one that's in process is an article on decommissioning, which really isn't covered in any of the standards or guidelines to our knowledge at present. So we can cover these other kinds of systems and subsystems that aren't covered elsewhere. Unique building types, maybe adding some sections covering data centers. And then insights on specific codes and protocols. How do commissioning providers interpret LEED, for example, in their projects, or ASHRAE 90.1? So we can take a look at all of those. As I said, revision of existing articles, and then additional documentations, tools, case studies. Really, the future of the guideline is what those working on it want it to be, but it's already an expansive guideline that, again, is intended not to replicate what's already out there. It's intended to be something new, something practical, something useful that commissioning providers and building owners and managers and others can turn to for expert guidance.
What was the page count, Dan, on the first published version?
I think, I don't recall offhand, but it's roughly 600 pages so far have been published in the PDF version online.
Thanks a lot, Dan. I want to present Christian Javorsky. She is a certified commissioning authority with ACG. I've probably known Christian going on 20 years now. She's been involved with ACG on guideline writing. I know she's involved in EMA. Christian, one of my favorite times, we went to the Baltimore Orioles together with the committee. Christian has got over 30 years of experience in HVAC and HVAC controls. She's with Cadin Group in Phoenix, Arizona. So Christian, I'll let you start with your first slide.
Christian, you're on mute.
You may be muted, Christian. Yeah.
Oh, sorry there.
Well, that's okay. Here you go.
Thanks, Jim. So a lot has changed. Obviously, a lot's changed in the world, in our industry since 2005. We were very heavily focused on the HVAC systems primarily when commissioning first got going. And now with the new guideline, we're finding that there's a lot more that people want commissioned and a lot more integration between systems. And as you can see, we're talking things like lighting controls, emergency power, low voltage, plumbing, domestic hot water, interior enclosures is becoming very popular, life safety, and then we always had a little of the existing building commission, but obviously that's picking up speed too, as far as being requested more. So it's just, we've gotten a lot more elaborate, and we're seeing that a lot more things are integrated into the HVAC system since it is visibility of the building. Next slide.
So Christian, does the commissioning of HVAC and HVAC controls described in the new guideline differ from the process described in the 2005 ACG guideline?
The process actually hasn't really changed at all. Obviously, as Dan alluded to, we've changed the terminology and we've changed the phasing of the projects, but the process itself is solid and pretty much stays just like it was previously. What we've done is we've just focused more on sustainability and resiliency, and we're still very focused on the owner project requirements as the third-party independent commissioning that we do.
So what are you conveying to readers in the sections that you wrote for HVAC and HVAC controls in the Building Systems Commissioning Guideline?
Well, we have a couple of things. The first that I'd like to touch on is obviously since the beginning of the commissioning process, the early involvement of the CXP is really crucial and important in identifying any challenges or obstacles that we foresee in the future and getting the project done and completed. So the earlier the better. So just like in the old guideline, which was pre-design, we're now talking about project initiation. And if the CXP is fortunate enough to be in that phase, we are able and capable of affecting more change and pointing out things that we see that maybe aren't completely defined for scope of work or things like that. So early involvement is always better. The second thing that we're seeing is we're trying to give the audience practical best practices and strategies and recommendations of things that we can do in the various phases to meet the milestones in the entire commissioning process. So we're really trying to help with lessons learned and things like that in a nice compact format of questions and conditions and things that we might want to bring up to the owner and the designer. And if we don't get involved in the project initiation, we happen to get involved in the design phase. It's still good because there's still a lot that we can affect on the final drawings that go out to the field to coordinate things. We're seeing a lot more integration of systems, and so there's a lot more coordination that has to happen as far as who's responsible for pieces and parts and how the system is all going to come together. Also, we're trying to define the ready for commissioning. This has always been a challenge over the years. Every project is a little bit different, and defining that as early as possible and getting the team's buy-in as to what that's going to be, so that in the end we're not actually running around crazy trying to make things happen. We want to streamline that process so everybody has the same set of expectations in delivering the project on time, on budget, and performing as it should. And then, like I said before, there's a lot of integration going on now. Since the HVAC and HVAC control sections obviously allow visibility to the building systems, we see a lot more integrated system testing between the systems that is rolled up into the HVAC controls, graphic interface and things like that.
Very good. So what role does commissioning serve with respect to achieving HVAC systems performance?
Well, obviously, this is very important and critical. the HVAC systems and control system is what allows us to control things to provide the designer's intent and the owner's requirements. So when we get into the technicalities of outside air ventilation and relative pressures of the building and IEQ and thermal comfort, these are things that are all really important. So we're kind of like I term it like a super QC through documentation and processes to try and achieve all these things at the end, because that's when we really figure out whether or not we did our job, is at the end of the project.
So what's the relationship between testing, adjusting, and balancing and automatic temperature controls and the commissioning of HVAC and HVAC controls?
Obviously, the tab and controls and automatic temperature controls have a very symbiotic relationship. On one hand, the control system is actually controlling the building to do the things, turning things on and off and doing sequences to allow things to work. And then tab has to come in and they have to actually distribute that water and air where it needs to go for all that equipment that the HVAC system and controls is controlling. So in the end, very interdependent and really have to work together to make all that happen for final set points of the system and make sure sensors and flow stations and things like that are calibrated to be reading properly, so that those values are of value to the owner in the end.
So do you have to have the tab and the controls on site at the same time?
I highly recommend it. Although sometimes it doesn't happen, but it is highly recommended that that does happen to make sure that everything can be finalized as it needs to be, and manipulation of the system is happening during that construction period with the tab guys on site, so we don't miss any of the set points, and we make sure when we leave it's all working properly.
So what can you tell us about digital technology interfaces with HVAC and HVAC controls?
Well, we've all seen that technology is always changing daily in our daily lives, and it's the same in the industry. There's a lot of changes in the BAS, BMS systems as far as things go. We're seeing a lot more integration, as I said before. We're seeing a lot more going to cloud management systems and things of that sort. And also wireless technologies is coming up with sensors and systems and things, different components. So we're seeing a lot of ability to gather more and more data. And obviously now we will have the ability to do things with it. If we go to cloud-based systems and things like that, we'll have more visibility of it rather than it just being locked at the site. We can share it across everybody that needs to see it.
Are you seeing a lot more convenient interfaces, like the ability to use cell phones or pads and devices to interact with the HVAC controls?
Absolutely, and that's helping a lot with the commissioning process too, because those things are basically, you know, live on site rather than going back to the office and writing reports and things. So we're seeing a lot of that. And
then with 5G, you can actually use a data signal a lot of times, even when you don't have an internet signal, I guess.
Correct. There's a lot coming, and I think we will continue to progress in that realm and make it easier for, like I said, more and more people to be involved in the commissioning process, even potentially remotely seeing the same screen, kind of like when we're doing presentations like this.
Yeah, that's right. And what does ready for testing mean specifically? You mentioned it earlier, but what determines that for HVAC?
Basically, unfortunately, on the HVAC system, the HVAC controls is the last part of the system that is readied for testing purposes on the commissioning side of things. So basically, we have the control system going, then the tab people come out and distribute everything as they should to the design intent, and then we are close to ready for testing on the commissioning side. So it's really important to define when the things that we want done on a particular project, what that requires for prerequisites, meaning paperwork, startups, issues, logs resolved, things like that. Nothing worse than at the end of the project when the schedule is already compressed to find out that we are not ready to actually do testing. So it's really important, kind of like the getting the CX provider involved in the project initiation phase. The sooner we define what ready for testing means for the entire commissioning team, the more productive we're going to be as a team to actually meet the schedule and the building performance in the end.
I just had a Corps of Engineers meeting on a Fort Knox job. And you probably well know this, that they use what they call certificate of readiness. Do you see value in doing something like that? Or do you like this idea of just defining it in a professional way up front?
No, I actually think it does bring some accountability on the certificate of readiness. On government work, they do require the individual trades to sign off on their work. And so that does force some accountability to actually make sure that the processes and procedures are in place and they did do what they said they did. So I see that as a great value from the commission provider perspective.
Fantastic, thank you. And why do HVAC controls deserve to be covered in their own section? You know, it's a mouthful to have to say HVAC and HVAC controls every time. So why is it its own section?
Well, I feel it really has to be. This is a system that the owner has to live with for quite some time. So it's really important to define what's going to be happening in that system as far as things like the graphics interface. The owner really needs to know what they need out of that system, and everything is really customizable nowadays as far as that goes. All different vendors do different things, but in the end, it's a very similar thing. But the availability of customization is just unlimited in this realm. So it's really important to work with your owners and the project team to define what the standards are going to be for the graphical interface. And this is really something that's underutilized in our commissioning processes. The graphical interface allows us to see the various effects of changes we make on all different systems at the graphical user interface. So we are able to actually make a set point change or turn a system on or do something, and we can see how it affects other systems in the building. So it allows us a real holistic approach in completing the project to the design intent and the owner's requirements. So I see it as very important and would highly recommend that those of you who are out there commissioning get more involved in this control side of things on the control system interface to actually utilize it to benefit commissioning of the entire system.
When you say other systems, are you referring to other HVAC systems or other building systems in general?
No, other building systems in general. Because the visibility exists at the graphical interface to the building already, a lot of ancillary and auxiliary systems are rolled up into these systems. Anything from lighting to generators to alarms on different equipment, critical alarms, so that it can all be tracked and trended in one place. So I'm seeing all different types of systems rolling up.
So futuristically, what do you see in HVAC, you know, after you're done commissioning and you're at the lake more often?
Oh, I would love that. But I do see that we are going to, like I said, that more cloud-based, more cell wireless-based things. So with the advances of technology, we will have a lot more availability to see the screen like we're talking about, where we could have people dialing in remote. We could actually even do some type of remote commissioning. I think there's still a need for on-site work in that we have to verify that what is going on in the building is actually and accurately depicted in the graphical interface and the systems that we're dialing into. But at the same time, I see this as a great way to get a lot of data and actually more effectively allow owners and consultants and things to see what's happening with the building. It's just unlimited when it rolls up into the cloud and things like that, as far as storage and all the data that we can actually trend and manage for the owner and the building performance.
You know, we used to talk about, you know, how many points and points list, and, you know, we're really talking about infinite points now, right?
Yes, really unlimited at this point.
It's just amazing. Thank you
It
very
absolutely
much,
is.
Christian. Appreciate it very much. We're going to move to Charles Jackson III. Charles is a good example of a younger ACG member. He's got a lot of energy and he's a great presenter. Charles is a professional engineer. He's also an ACG certified commission authority. and he's also a certified PMP, project management professional, I presume is what that means, Charles. And Charles is Sustainable, which is the institute, right? The Project Management Institute. Charles is with Sustainable Building Partners, and he works out of Fairfax, Virginia. He has just recently done a really good presentation at CX Energy on lighting controls. And he's also the author of the lighting controls and the daylighting controls section of the ACG Building Systems Commissioning Guideline. So Charles, we're gonna move right into it. And I guess, what are you trying to convey in the sections that you wrote?
Thanks, Jim, for the great introduction. The biggest thing I'm trying to convey, to the readers are basically the fundamentals needed to successfully guide you through the commissioning process, for lighting and daylighting controls. Basically, you wanted to answer those simple questions. Why are lighting controls critical systems? What is typically required in each phase? Where should you be able to find the documents needed to provide reviews, whether design reviews, submittal reviews, and not just as far as looking in the design documents, go a little deeper into, hey, let's see if they have the sequence of operations, what are the fixture schedules looking like? And also what's needed to develop the functional tests. Also you want to know who are the primary stakeholders and who's, at each different stage, whose involvement is required. And of course, as we mentioned earlier, one of the big staples that we tried to get into each section, as far as when we went to the discipline specifics, are that how do you determine what is ready for testing? And of course, when's the optimal time to begin functional testing? So I think those are the biggest things we wanted to answer in the lighting controls and daylighting sections. That's
good, Charles. Very good. What ways do building occupants interact with lighting and daylighting?
So the funny thing is, I asked before, one of the questions we wanted to answer before is why are lighting control systems critical? And that's because lighting is one of the significant factors in determining occupant comfort. Daylighting becomes extremely important, when you're maximizing natural light. Allowing more natural light versus artificial light has been shown to correlate directly into occupant comfort. So, and I think lighting is one of the systems which the occupants directly interact with, and they can readily identify issues if the lighting system is not working as intended. So, for me, I think the biggest example I try to go is the conference rooms, because conference rooms, depending on the type of use for it, you need to either have the lights lit up if you're having a meeting versus dimmed out for a presentation. So being able to have that functionality and the occupants to be able to know, directly exactly, how it's supposed to work.
Are you saying that people literally feel warmer or colder somewhat based on the lighting?
Yes. And like I said, there are studies that show that, there's a perception as far as, it's too much light in the area versus, not enough. And sometimes they feel like a perception of additional heat.
That's interesting because a lot of us in HVAC are used to hot and cold complaints. We don't think about, lighting complaints, but that's obviously a thing.
Yeah. And I from just previous experience, I used to go in for warranty calls. And you would notice back when you can unscrew some of the lights is everything passed and made their lighting levels, and then you actually see people that have actually physically unscrewed it because it was just too much light.
Too much light.
Even though it met the requirements, but still everyone, it's their own personal comfort.
That's great. How did commissioning providers develop professional relationships with vendors of lighting and daylighting control products? And what do these relationships need to accomplish?
And that's a great point. I think commissioning in general, provides a great opportunity to build a relationship with vendors, and you truly get to understand the products because you're testing, through all of the different rigors and remorse. So like through the design and submittal review, you get educated on the lighting, the control characteristics and how they'll be applied to your project. There's been many times I've actually called that lighting control vendor and talk to their technical person to kind of get a little more understanding of what the system, the capability of what they're able to do. And I've also gained a wealth of knowledge of just meeting the vendors during site visits as they're programming the system or during functional testing. And like I said, I believe all team members on a project are invested in, delivering a quality project. So most of them are willing to share information. And, over time, you get to see the same systems, the same vendors on projects, which help only, foster stronger relationships and lessons learned from previous projects and help you strengthen your reviews and your test procedures, on the next project.
Let me ask you this: can the lighting control vendor do their vendor commissioning, their checkout, and training on the same trip or in the same time frame, or do those have to be separate mobilizations?
So I guess it depends, of course, on the size of the system. But in my experience, sometimes you can do that programming, but a lot of times training needs to be done separately, because during the commissioning process, you can you might find issues or things might need to be tweaked a little way as far as set points and those adjustments, and that's valuable information to be shared during the training session. That'll help truly help the operators run the buildings.
Yeah, that makes sense. So how do different project variables affect the commissioning of lighting and daylighting controls?
It's basically, you're kind of governed by your local AHJ. So basically, depending on where you're at, where I'm at in the DC area, we follow the DC code, and there's also, some of the sustainable, as far as LEED and some of the other requirements. So I think that's the big thing. One of my favorite examples is daylighting controls, because everyone looks at it a little bit differently. It's been in the code for years. However, depending on the AHJ, and this is something I've seen, quite frequently, there can be a loose interpretation as far as what's daylighting. If you have dimmable lights, is that considered daylight lighting, or does it have to automatically dim based on the natural light hitting the sensor? So those are different things that you need to be aware of and kind of walk through and try to establish some of that earlier. And I guess, and like I said, as far as LEED, depending on some of the metrics, if it's like monitoring based commissioning or something, you want to make sure how the lighting load is being captured. Is it going to be connected to your BAS? So those are some of the things a lot of times need to be defined at the beginning of the project, so we can track it throughout the commissioning process.
It's an interesting point you bring up. Most people don't know about the district and the fact that in order to develop in Washington, DC, you have to actually not create additional footprint on the infrastructure. So you literally have to almost go net zero, or take some sort of rainwater treatment offline before you can put your storm sewer in, and so forth. And I guess that applies to lighting too, and saving energy, Charles.
Yep, that's correct.
So how can commission providers support the owner with conditions when conditions differ from design intent? And I guess what we get is owner changes on the fly, Charles, or tell us about this.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess as the commissioning provider, one of the, in the ethos of commissioning, we must hold the team agreed upon the design intent documents. So, and documentation is our most potent weapon, basically, establishing defined requirements and all of that stuff, as far as the pre-functional checklist, ready for testing documentation before testing in the field. So, we're the owner's eyes and ears. That's how I like to call it, but, sometimes you'll get valued engineering and partial programming. And these things are, depending on if it's just partial programming they want us to test, those are things we can kind of recommend that if there's any changes after the programming, it invalidates the testing. So those are the type of things we kind of hold, and we want to, make that clear and make that understood, because a lot of times, you'll commission something, it works, they go back and change it. And then they'll be like, hey, we saw your report, it was working, I guess, at the time, but then you went back and did additional work. So we should also try to look at, kind of how the operator would have to see it. So we try to test it in its final configuration. And that's where, like, if there's a BAS or BMS system, we want to test it from that vantage point, because that's how they'll actually be running it in the field. So it's more just trying to make them aware of those scenarios.
To follow up, I mean, a lot of times, I guess you've got more of a design than what the owner even wants. And so to operate it they want it sort of stripped down to a more operational version. And I think sometimes, Charles, they don't even want it on the BAS. They want it standalone. You want to talk about that for a second?
Yeah, yeah, a lot of times, you know, depending on, of course, the size and scope, yeah, it might be easier, and as far as the integrations go, to do it standalone, and that's fine. It's bringing them the awareness that over time, having multiple systems can cause a headache, and as you do want to get integrated, you know, it's better to have the ability and not use it versus taking away the ability now, and did it become costly if you ever change your mind in the future?
Ah, that's a good point. It's a real good point. So again, ready for testing. Tell us how that relates to lighting and daylighting controls.
So, and ready for testing is something that I think we all struggle with, because everybody's definition of readiness is different. And, you know, from a commissioning provider to a contractor to an owner to you know, developer, everyone's ready is a little bit different. So here we try to define, you know, just some of the prerequisites needed before functional testing. And that's kind of how we looked at it. Like for lighting controls, lighting fixtures are installed and working. You'd be surprised how many times, yes, it's programmed, but all the lighting fixtures aren't in. So, you know, occupancy sensors, switches, you know, they're installed and working. You know, the programming of lighting controls is complete, not partial per floor, but, you know, the overall system is complete. And the programmers have confirmed completion. And the biggest thing I think for lighting is construction in that testing area is complete. So as you know, we're dealing with occupancy sensors, we're dealing with timing and stuff of that nature. So having that area complete of additional construction can really, you know, hamper testing if that's not followed. And of course, you know, any doors, shades, you know, lighting, you know, shade control, if that's supposed to be part of the project, making sure that's installed as well. And like I said, daylighting is pretty much the same thing. You know, you want to make sure your photo cells, you know, they have direct, unimpeded access to the sunlight. You know, and like I said, basically all the programming is complete. So those are kind of the biggest things we look at for ready for testing. And then once we take a step further, when we get to testing, making sure we have that appropriate personnel, where we have that in lighting control, either programmer actually on site with testing, and to be able to validate if we find any issues.
Yep, that sounds good. And this is a dangerous question to ask an electrical guy, so don't go all Star Wars on us. But what's your futuristic vision in your industry?
So for me, I mean, the future is now, really. Like, you know,
that's a good point. Yeah, I like that.
Like I said, lighting controls, they continue to advance from when I first started. You know, like now they have like power over Ethernet, you know, the seamless integration with all types of systems. Like for me, I think the biggest thing is that advanced and addressable fixtures. Yeah. What I would love to see is customizing lighting per the actual occupant. You know, not per, you know, each occupant kind of in its little, you know, office cube, you know, where conference room, lounge, cafeteria, or classroom. Like for example, a classroom, each teacher has its own kind of lighting setting. So you can be in the same room, but, you know, teachers, depending on the subject or how their teaching style is, that lighting is tailored to them, maybe through an app or something, you know, but having that flexibility and customization. And then also, you know, maybe conference rooms, you know, just something where it's tied to your calendar. So you set up a meeting in that conference room, put in what type of meeting, the lighting at 2 to 3 will be, you know, scheduled and programmed based on what that meeting is. So just taking that to the next step, and also decreasing our electrical footprint, utilizing lighting more integration with all the system, and having the buildings kind of learn the occupants. So we design, I guess, you know, and we test based on everyone being there. But, you know, as far as when you actually get to the, you know, the tenant side, or, you know, people filling the buildings, it changes daily depending on the type of day. And the lighting should be able to react to that, knowing at noon everyone's on lunch. So, you know, now you have occupancy centers, but being able to build more onto that with some of the other systems, I think we can just kind of, the world is limitless as far as you know, the way we can connect and the way technology is improving.
It's amazing when you think about individually programmable fixtures compared to trying to find the bad flaw in a daisy chain that's got everything shut down, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then you have the one guy on the left side of you that's too much like the one guy, who's a little less. So being able to just kind of control it per the person, I think would be amazing.
That's great. Yeah, I agree totally. I just want to show the insights and the strategies really quick, which is just an opportunity to see some of the resources. Of course, ACG, ASHRAE, the Energy Management Association, the Associated Air Balance Council. There are a lot of resources out there. I strongly recommend visiting Department of Energy Whole Building Design Guide under Project Management. You can find a great deal of commissioning information. With that said, I think I'm going to turn it to Sam to give us some information and maybe pass a few questions.
Yes, thank you, Jim. And while we're going through our Q&A session, this is a page, there's 2 QR codes here, depending on where you fall in. You can access the guideline here. It is free for ACG and EMA members, and for non-members, you can purchase it. However, if you're a government official, code authority, or an institutional building owner, you can request access for free, and I'm just going to post that link in the chat right here. So for the first question, that was, when do we use sampling strategy in commissioning?
So why don't you start, Christian? You may be muted.
You're
again.
muted, Christian.
Thank you. So typically this is defined as part of the OPR in the commissioning plan as far as what the owner's requirements for their particular buildings are, and it could also be in specs and other jobs. But sampling strategies are usually used when we have a bunch of the similar type equipment. So they basically are the same. And really, like I said, it depends on the complexity of the project and what the owner and the designer have in mind for the building itself.
And I would like to add that there is a guideline section on sampling strategies, section 5.11.3, which was not in the April initial publication, but that is planned for the July update to the guidelines. So stay tuned. There will be an entire section devoted to sampling strategies.
Charles, it applies to lighting controls as well.
Yeah, I guess a lot of times it depends on the initial scope, but overall it depends. Kind of you have a whole bunch of the same type of systems, and a lot of times that's when you'll decide to do a sample percentage. If you have 100 of the same type of conference rooms, maybe you do a 20% sample of that. So I think it also depends on trying to make sense what works within the scope and the budget of the project.
Okay, thank you. While we're on Charles, there was a question on slide 49. How significant is furnishing and surface finishes significant with documenting a complete lighting control system? Would it benefit the client having lighting controls be considered for electrical open season testing?
That's an interesting one. So yes, you would want it in its final configuration, but you also have to, it needs it in order to get the occupancy, and a lot of times stuff moves in a little bit later. So as close as you can to the final configuration of that space is preferred, because, for example, bookshelves, stuff of that nature might get in the way of sensors that might not be initially on the plan, but being able to see the final configuration, you can properly test the lighting control systems as the end user will see it. So I think it is important to get as much as you can possibly in there. And yeah, if you could do it a little bit after, when the final furniture and stuff, I think that would be optimal, but sometimes we have to deal with, the realistic constraints of the project.
Okay, thank you. There was a question about the ability to mark up the guideline. I can answer this unless Dan, you wanted to.
Yeah, I'll say a couple of things, and then feel free to add to it, Sam. First of all, as the guideline, it will be updated quarterly. The entire thing will not be updated. So by intention, the guideline pages are not numbered. And so, it won't interrupt page numbering when, say, a section is added here or there to the guidelines. So you will be informed at each quarterly update what has been updated. So you, for example, if you prefer to print out the guideline and mark up a paper copy, you would be able to just print out the new sections that have been updated, swap those in where they go, and you'll be good to go. You don't have to print out the entire publication every quarter to have a current version.
Great, Dan, that answered my question, my part of it too.
Great.
There was another question about 5G. With the move to 5G and to other methods of wireless communication, what effect will this have on cybersecurity?
Charles, that should start with you.
I think a lot of it is being more regulated as far as just, especially I know working on government facilities. A lot of times when you're doing wireless, you have to get that cleared first, and you have to submit, some of the characteristics, and they have to get approved by, I guess, the security officers. So I think a lot of it is just getting more stringent requirements just to make sure that what vulnerabilities and the access control. So I think a lot of that is being fleshed out before people are adopting these technologies.
And I have something to add on that too. We're seeing a lot more of participation from an IT person on the commissioning team due to cybersecurity concerns and things like that with the various technologies. So that is happening.
Yeah, another issue associated with cybersecurity is simply the control of documents, particularly if you're on secure sites. We're doing a SCIF, which is a secure confined information facility. So none of the documents are supposed to be kept as records. And just receiving documents from government agencies or organizations now has a much stricter cybersecurity rules for where you can post them. Like you just can't take Corps of Engineer documents for a secure site and put them on your server. And it's incumbent on commissioning firms to have personnel who understand the cybersecurity requirements for documentation now.
And another question just came in. Is cybersecurity addressed in the guideline?
I believe, I'll jump in quickly and feel free to add to it, Jim. I believe it's touched upon briefly in one of the introductory sections on technologies and commissioning, but that is an example of a great example of a topic that we could expand in the future potentially. As I said, there are a number of special topics that aren't covered yet in the guideline, and clearly cybersecurity is a chief concern.
Yeah, and we do have more than one member of the committee working on that. One of them was the person who did cybersecurity for Carnegie Hall. So we do have ACG expertise working on that and should see a lot more, maybe not in the July, but hopefully in the October update, we'll get more cybersecurity, security in general. We're planning to go to cameras, metal detectors, access controls, and again, the video camera systems, which are all, that's how we build schools these days, unfortunately. And that's another thing that you'll see coming into the guideline as well. Intrusion defense systems, mass evacuation and warning systems. All this is envisioned for the guideline moving forward.
Thank you. So I see about 2 questions lined up left. The next one is, we'd like to instill commissioning into our specifications. How do I do that? How do I get started? What do I need?
I guess I can take that. We do, Dan, have sample specifications in the appendix of the guideline. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And I think looking at the ACG sample specification guidelines are helpful. There's also a breakout because in the case of building envelope commissioning, there's a lot of particulars that apply to building envelope that don't apply to the other team. So we actually have more than one spec section. It's also extremely important to cross-reference spec sections because generally speaking, ACG advocates for putting the entire commissioning specification in the Division 1 section, but you need all the other divisions to reference back to that section so that those contractors are aware that they have commissioning provisions in that Division 1 spec section. So you would have a Division 23, a Division 22, 26, 25, all reference back to your 01 spec. But get started. We'll probably have workshops on specs, and this will also play into the RFQ, RFP information that we're adding in July.
Okay. And another person asked, as a building official, I need to learn load calculations. How do I do that? Where? And I need to be able to approve them. I'm not sure if we have that training for
Load-
ACG.
That sounds like an ASHRAE issue to me, but Christian, why don't you address that?
Yeah, I don't think in our guideline we have what would be needed to be able to do that. But yes, ASHRAE would have a lot more resources in that realm.
I would reference going to ASHRAE fundamentals and look at HVAC, and you'll see load calculations presented there. There's also rules of thumb that you can pick up on calculating load out of things like the Train HVAC manual and some other industry sources.
Okay, thank you. I think that we have covered everything. Someone was asking that the QR code might not have worked for one of them, but if you just email info@commissioning.org, we'll be happy to help you out. Jim, did you have any other questions that you wanted to drop in?
Not at the moment. I want to thank Charles and Christian and Dan, and also Sam, you and Sim, and appreciate everybody tuning in and listening to the webinar. We're really excited not only about what's in the building systems commissioning guideline, but the future that it holds for all of us.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.